updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks right now moving into the red. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all declining. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks in the red in a choppy tape today. The Dow's currently down 12 points, was up 216. S&P's dropped 10, and NASDAQ is lower by 54. The U.S. 10-year yield at 3.87%. Gold is up 3. Oil is in the red. And Bitcoin is down by 1%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were healthcare and materials. Real estate and financials were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Merck, J&J, and Visa, while Dow Inc. and Walmart led to the downside. In other news, Fed's Brainerd says that it's appropriate soon to move to a slower rate hike pace. And the New York Times reported that Amazon plans to lay off about 10,000 employees as soon as this week. Wrapping things up, Getty Images reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, SQUAW on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, among our most read today, how Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping of China agreed to a series of goodwill gestures intended to improve ties between their countries after the first in-person meeting between the leaders of the U.S. and China since the pandemic began. Well, President Biden speaking earlier today from Bali on the possibility of China taking over Taiwan.
I absolutely believe there's need not be a new Cold War. I do not think there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan, and I made it clear that our policy on Taiwan has not changed at all.
That was President Biden speaking to the press after meeting with China's President Xi Jinping earlier today. We've got a great guest with us. Dexter Tiff Roberts is back with us. He's Senior Fellow for the Mansfield Center at the University of Montana. Also Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative. Also former Bloomberg Businessweek China Bureau Chief and the author of the book, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, The Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. He joins us via Zoom from Missoula this afternoon. Dexter, good to have you back with us. What did you make of President Biden's comments following his first in-person meeting in years with President Xi Jinping?
Yeah, well, clearly he's trying to reassure Beijing that the policy hasn't changed. And you have to keep in mind this comes after, I think, maybe 7 separate statements by Biden that the U.S. would come to the defense of Taiwan in the case of an invasion by Beijing. And so that, not surprisingly, has gotten Beijing very riled up. So Beijing, I think they would welcome this comment, this support for the one-child policy. On the other hand, Beijing has been saying for a while, you say one thing, you the United States and Biden say one thing, but you actually act in a different way. And they, along with those other comments by Biden about supporting Taiwan in a military situation, there have been the repeated high-level visits by various, first by back in the Trump administration officials, and now those have continued, of course, most recently with Pelosi's visit to Taiwan.
Hey, you know, Tiff, you've written about China. You know China really well, and we talked about your book, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, and about the divisive system that was there that ultimately, would be very challenging to the country's development going forward. How do you see it? I mean, is Chinese capitalism working, or do you see this is a big undoing, kind of the news flow that we've seen out of China over the last month or so?
I think they're, unfortunately, they have not made progress on getting the economy to work better nor marketize it more. I mean, really, we've seen the opposite under Xi Jinping for a number of years now, actually, going back earlier, which is this increasing imposition of state control over the economy, continuing crackdown on the private sector. And, today what they're really dealing with is the economy is suffering under the twin weights of both the continuing COVID zero policy, which has been good at preserving life in China, which is important, but it's been deadly for the economy, and then also the continuing property crackdown. So I would say they continue to struggle with the economy, and the policy really hasn't been going in the right direction.
Well, how do you take, because we actually talked about how Chinese ADRs that trade in the U.S. today were rallying, and this is because we saw a couple of things, some easing and help for the troubled and indebted Chinese property sector. And then on Friday, we got news about maybe easing of COVID-19, but it does feel like a back and forth with policy. So how are we as observers, not in China, how are we as investors supposed to kind of read sometimes a move forward, sometimes a step backward?
Well, yeah, I think that's what we keep seeing, and maybe unfortunately it's too often one step forward and two steps back. And I think with the COVID zero policy, or the some signs of easing, obviously they're welcomed. People have referred to them as baby steps, and ultimately the challenge they face there is they announced these slight easings in COVID zero. Meanwhile, we've seen COVID surging across the country. Beijing, Zhengzhou, where the world's largest iPhone factory is, and down in Guangzhou. And they simply can't ease up on these policies until, first of all, they have a much broader vaccination program across the country, particularly with elderly people who have a low level of vaccination there. And it's not going to, no matter what they say about easing, they're going to have to pull back until they actually start to get COVID under control. I think the smart money should bet maybe on certainly no serious easing until after the National People's Congress next March.
Wow, that's quite a bit of time, although it has been, close to 3 years at this point that they've been dealing with this. Hey, Dexter, just in the last minute that we have, you lived in Beijing for, 2 decades when you were with Bloomberg Business Week and writing your book. What do you hear from people on the ground there right now, people you're in touch with, about what life is like and how things have shifted over the last couple of years?
Well, first of all, I think there is a concern, as we were discussing about COVID zero. The rolling lockdowns of cities are continuing. I think there's growing frustration about that, even though there has been support earlier for the government's efforts to try to keep people safe. But we're starting to see that start to see fissures in that, if you will. I think the economy is a real worry about people. Mm-hmm. And there's also a growing concern about this politicization of the economy, this feeling that politics comes first, and right. And private entrepreneurs and elsewhere have to bend to that.
Hey Tiff, sit back for a second, and we're going to do a little bit of news, and then we're going to come back and continue with you. We're going to come back to Tiff Roberts. He's senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative. His book, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, The Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World, certainly a go-to for us when it comes to all things China. We'll be back in a moment.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 1061 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. Definitely feels like a Monday. Carol Massler, along with Tim Stanovic. So good to have you back.
Oh, it's good to be back.
I know it was good to get a break, but it's never the
Was
same.
it good to get a break from me?
No.
Okay, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Was it good to get a break from me?
I wasn't getting a break from you. No, I was just
the whole control room
getting
was
a
like,
break
yes.
from everything.
All right, coming up, we're going to continue with Tiff Roberts. We're talking China, U.S. It does feel like perhaps a new day, but it does feel like some old things will continue to plague that relationship.
In the meantime, let's get an update on what's going on in the markets because Charlie Pellet, we got less than a half hour to go.
And indeed, Tim, I did miss you. We've got the Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ, both on the minus side. Choppy session, though, right now. The Dow higher, right to the numbers, up by 9 points right now. Little change there. S&P in the red, down 9, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 50, a drop there of 0.4%. 10-year yield, 3.87%. The 2-year yield, 4.40%. Spot gold up 0.1% right now, 17.72 the ounce. Bitcoin down 0.5, 16,288 on Bitcoin. West Texas Intermediate crude now lower by 4%, 85.41 for a barrel of WTI. Stocks fluctuated as investors mulled what the Federal Reserve Vice Chair Lael Brainard's comments mean for the central bank's path ahead. She spoke with Bloomberg Radio